The NBA draft night is always exciting. Franchise can select a young prospect that can bring something new to the roster and help the team to keep growing. And that's what the Milwaukee Bucks will be doing at the 47th pick. We of course don't know who will they pick yet, but we can take a look at some players that are projected to be selected in the spot and see how they would fit if they were picked by the Milwaukee Bucks. To do so, I've taken a look to 5 of the biggest mock drafts on the internet to check which players are expected to be selected by the team, and I've broken down the way they play to see which of them. Before I start, let's take into account this is the 47th pick, and you can only do so good with it. We've seen players pick this late that end up having pretty successful careers, but if they are projected here, it's because scouts are skeptical on some of their skills. So if I don't sound super optimistic about them, it's not because they are bad players, it's because, well, if they were a lock as future useful NBA players, they wouldn't be this low. But that doesn't mean they don't have some pretty useful abilities that could help the Bucks if they are able to make them fit. First is the ESPN mock draft, who has the Milwaukee Bucks picking Koby Brea. Brea is one of the best shooters of the generation, if not the best. He shot 43.5% from 3 last season, and he looks like a player who's able to hit all kind of shots, like not only some spot-up shoots, but he plays a lot of ball action, and that's something that could really help the Bucks because they have a lot of players who can shoot but can't really run into some shots and can't really create advantages with the off-ball movement, so that's something that can really have some value on the roster, even if I haven't seen Doc Rivers run this kind of plays, so I'm not sure how willing he is to use that skill. That said, Brea has had some insane shooting numbers during his NCAA tenure. The numbers he's made have only been done before by players like Kyle Korver, Sam Hauser, Steve Novak, like pretty elite shooters. The problem with him is like that seems the only thing he can do at an NBA level. He doesn't really have any sort of physicality to be a positive defender, he can't really attack the rim or create his own shot, so he can become pretty unidimensional. And the Bucks have had this sort of player who can just shoot, and if they are not given enough space to let fly, they just don't do anything else, and it doesn't look pretty, right? Like the offense have looked kind of stiff when defense counter that kind of play, so I'm not in love about adding this sort of player. However, the idea of having a shooter just running around the court can create some chaos on the defense. We've seen someone like Duncan Robinson, for example, who at the first years of his career especially was like just a shooter and nothing else, and only with that he put defense into trouble, he forced them to switch, he forced them to gamble. There's a lot to take about this kind of player, but again, I haven't seen Doc Rivers run any sort of play like that, so I'm not sure that's something the Bucks will do if they end up picking Brea. Something similar can be said about Chaz Lanier, who is the player the Athletic mock draft has the Milwaukee Bucks picking. Pretty similar to Brea, he's a little shooter, but that's kind of his only saving grace. So my feelings about him are basically the same, although they are not exactly the same player. Lanier seems to be able to hit pull-up jumpers more efficiently, so that could help him when the defense do what I said about closing super strong on the shooter and force them to put the ball on the floor. He can give 1 or 2 bounces, get some space from mid-range and knock the shot down from there. He has proven to be able to do so, he seems comfortable with that kind of shot, so he might be a little more versatile on offense because of that, but he still doesn't really bring all that much on defense, he still can't really create his own shot or run the offense, so it's kind of the same we've discussed. RJ Lewis, the player that NBA Draft.net had the Bucks picking, is however a completely different archetype. He's a defensive-minded player, and he can be a positive both as an individual defender and as a team defender. He has active hands, he fights through screens, and he has a good size, but he's also aware of his positioning, he can map the court, so he can also play as a help defender when needed. He's somewhat of an intriguing prospect because he's had a big role on offense in college, but it doesn't seem like he will ever have that kind of role on the NBA. So it's not really clear how he will fit when his offensive load gets reduced. If you look at his stats, he wasn't really effective with his shooting, but that might improve once there's another player running the offense and he has more space to operate, when he doesn't have to force so many shots, when he's not the guy with the ball trying to create some plays, which is something he doesn't seem able to do at the highest level. So that's something to be skeptical about, but there's room for improvement. So yeah, you might end up having a player who's good on defense and somewhat usable on offense, but you might also end with a player who's great but not outstanding on defense, so he doesn't really make up for his offensive inconsistency. If you ask me, that really sounds like Andre Jackson Jr., right? Like, it feels like I'm talking about the same kind of player. But there's a key difference that while Ajax sometimes feels afraid to shoot or attacking the rim, that doesn't seem to be Louis' case, right? Since he's had to be a key part of an NCAA offense, he's now kind of this better ask for forgiveness than permission player. So he might be a player who forces a lot of shots, that has some terrible decision making and some really bad shooting percentages. I don't really know if I think that's better than not shooting, I just think that difference is worth mentioning. So the question here is like, do the Bucks still trust Ajax to take a leap? Honestly, I do, but he was relegated to the bench at the end of the season, like he barely played in the last 2 months I think, so I don't know how much Doc Rivers is ready to give him a go, but I still think he can be a very useful player, so I'm not really in love with the idea of picking someone who can't end up overlapping so much with him. Draft Room has the Bucks picking Amari Williams, who is the first center on the list, and just because of that he is spots on, because it feels to me like this is a position the Bucks really need to get some people, right? Especially if Brook Lopez ends up leaving this offseason, like they basically have no real centers, so it makes sense to select one with this pick. The thing is, I'm not really that sure Williams is an NBA center. He's pretty big, but he's not super mobile, he doesn't have quick feet, so we might end up having this same sort of problem the Bucks had with Brook, but even accentuated, like he doesn't feel comfortable defending outside of the paint, and that works much better in NCAA than it does in the NBA. So I'm not sure it really makes all that sense to pick a big player whose athleticism doesn't look ready for NBA standards. He has some things going for him though, because on offense he does feel pretty comfortable playing outside the paint, but not because he can shoot, but because he's a good passer. And that's pretty intriguing, because that might help him to fit in a system that needs Giannis to have space in the paint, but I'm still not sure that's enough for him to crack the rotation. Like, scouts are skeptic about if he's going to be able to effectively score in the NBA, because on NCAA he's relied maybe too much on being the tallest guy on the floor, and I don't think he will be on the NBA, so he doesn't have a great touch around the rim, he's not really a roller, so if you're not a threat as a scorer, your passing can only take you that far, you know, because the defense is not going to collapse around you and you won't have that many passing windows to shine as a passer. I don't know, he at least feels like the least redundant player for the Bucks that we're talking about so far, because he doesn't really overlap with anything the Bucks have, but at the same time he feels like the biggest gamble, because you can really see flaws on him that could make him not be an NBA player 3 years from now. And last, Tankathon has the Bucks picking Alijah Martin, who looks like the most promising name of the list to me. He might not get down to 47th pick, because some mock draft have him selected higher, and you can see why. He's a great defender who can play at the point of attack, he puts pressure on the ball and also navigates screens, and despite being pretty undersized, he's super strong and athletic, which help him a lot. And we've seen this kind of small defensive backcourt player have a niche on the NBA, so I don't see why he wouldn't make a solid NBA player. He can struggle if he has to switch on wings that can just shoot over him, but it feels like the kind of player you want on your backcourt because he really brings some energy and is the kind of winning energy that can translate to the whole team. He isn't a one-trick pony though, like he can play offense. He's a decent shooter both in catch and shoot and off the dribble if he has to relocate or play a handoff or something like that, although he might be streaky, so there's probably going to be some nights where he can't just buy a shot and becomes nearly unplayable. But if you look at his percentages and his shooting, it feels like his shot can be at least somewhat effective on an NBA level, and he's going to be able to stay on the court. The biggest problem with him, and the reason he might drop to 47th, is because he doesn't really have the skills to play as a point guard on offense. Like, he doesn't have the ball handling, he doesn't have the passing, so you can get to this weird situation when you have to play him and you have to play another point guard, so you end up with two pretty small players on your backcourt, and that can get pretty exploitable on defense. But the Milwaukee Bucks are a team that might not have that problem, because I think with Damian Lillard out, they are going to have to play Giannis as a sort of point guard a lot of times, like the offense is going to run through him a lot. So you might be okay with him on the court and no other real point guard because the way your offense is running, so you don't end up in this situation where you have like two players that are 6'2" on your defense. Because of that, he feels like the most interesting pick we've discussed today, but we're still going to have to see if the Bucks have a real chance to pick him or if another team bets on him before they can do it. So these are the names that look like realistic picks, but we all know that things change drastically on draft night, so we'll have to see what the Bucks end up doing, and once they do, we'll discuss the kind of players they've selected. But let me know if you think any of these players can be useful, if you have any other name in mind, and if you enjoyed the video, I'd like to ask you to give a like and subscribe. That would help me a lot.